Hi guys, welcome to the behind the scenes of our second film we've ever made. We'll see how we got to this place, how we made this film, the process of making it, the mistakes we made, what went well, what went not so well. We'll talk about the differences between this film and our first film. We'll talk about the content of the film and what it was like working with a real actor, as well as a child actress slash friend who helped out on set as the main actress. So let's dive right into the film and discuss things as they come up. The film opens up with 4 shots. In the first shot, our main character is putting sugar into the tea, and as you can see at the bottom of the tea, there's already quite a lot of sugar, so clearly he's not really paying attention to how much he's putting. We then have a shot of him tapping his foot by the table to suggest anxiousness. And in the third shot, you can see him check his phone, and the audience is given more information as to what the film is about. Clearly, he's waiting for a date. He's waiting for a girl that he just met on Tinder. And then we go on to the fourth shot of the sequence where he fixes his hair, again, trying to be presentable, looking anxious and nervous. So just to sum up, we chose these 4 shots at the beginning of the film to add pace and to set up the tone of the film. At this moment, the audience is not given any more information than this, and they will have to wait and find out what the rest of the film is about. But this is how we preset the first beat of the film. The shot that stands out to me the most is possibly the 4th shot, where he fixes his hair, and that's because unfortunately the color grading doesn't look quite matching to the first 3 shots. I think it looks a little bit too red. If given the time, we would have spent a bit more time finessing these colors in the last shot to make sure that all the shots match. But overall, I think it's done quite well to set up the tone of the story. We then move on to the next shot of the story, which sets our character up in the world, and you can see him in the cafe waiting as somebody else walks in. As you can see in the shot, there's a strong reflection in the window, so I knew that I couldn't shoot this straight on. That was the initial plan, to shoot the beginning straight on. However, because of this reflection, we had to sort of adjust on the go. So we changed the perspective of the shot and decided to shoot it side on. So even though the shot reflects, it doesn't really show any lighting equipment or any crew or any camera equipment. In the next shot, you see the girl walk into the cafe and look for a person that she's looking for. You can see her scan the room, and as soon as she locks eyes at our main character, that's when the cut happens. In this way, we aim to suggest that she's in fact looking for this person. So as you can see, the direction of this film here specifically is led by the eye line. And the guy looks up and has an expression of disappointment. Clearly, this is not who he's looking for, which further sets up the interaction which is about to follow in the film.
Aren't you going to offer me a seat?
Oh, sorry, I'm waiting for someone.
As you can see from the next shot, the lights that we used were in fact the same lights that we used in the first film. Again, these weren't professional lights. Firstly, as you can see, you can actually see the reflection of the light itself in this shot, but also the color of their backs looks completely different from the color that is outside. Inside it's much warmer, the outside it's much colder, which doesn't really make sense. You wouldn't have such a strong red color inside. Even if the color inside was red, it would not be this strong. So you can see even from the back of the girl actress that it's a lot more red than the outside. Talking about lighting, we did make a better choice by placing them next to a window, which gave us a lot of natural light, but we didn't quite fix the problem with the inside lighting. And I guess moving forward to the next film, we really need to look into this problem and ideally invest in a DOP or a cinematographer who knows what they're doing, who could potentially bring their own lights or who could hire lights and really set up something that looks and feels natural. Because as you can tell from this shot and many subsequent shots, this doesn't feel natural, it doesn't look natural. The shots that are straight on for both characters look a little bit better because the red color is on their sides and it is not as visible, so you can mostly see the outside light, which is great. But again, the red light posed problems when color grading especially.
Oh, no, actually...
Quickly talking about the location. In this shot, you can see the white wall with the red and white ribbon. Originally, there was a mirror here, which obviously didn't work because you could clearly see me with the camera standing there. So we had to take this off, but then it was just a white wall left with a nail. And so at the last minute, we decided to hang this ribbon there to add some sort of depth. Ideally, if we would have had a bit more time, I would have spent longer dressing this wall because even though we have this ribbon there, it still looks a little sparse. I wish we could have had a bit more something happening there. It feels a little dead and a little flat. As you can see, when we have the shot of the girl next to the wall, it feels quite a flat image. In comparison to the background of the boys shot, there's a lot more going on, and you can see a mirror and you can see some foil and you can see some tassels and a bit of a flag, which makes the image look a little bit more interesting. So going forward, I think we would have spent a bit more time dressing up the setting before filming. Unfortunately, we didn't really have much time because this was a budget constraint and the location, the cafe, didn't let us use it for a long time before shooting. We only had time to get in there and start shooting, and that was it. I'm not quite sure if you can see from this shot, but there's a clear reflection of myself with the camera filming, and that's because phones are naturally reflective. Ideally, we wouldn't have had this issue, but I'm not quite sure how we would have solved this issue without using the effects. I wanted the phone to look natural and not have overlay of the image, so we had to have some sort of reflection. If anybody knows how to solve this issue, let me know. I'd be very interested to find out for our future productions.
What do you mean?
Relax.
Now, as the plot progresses, we get a bit more information about what is happening, and we find out that the girl the boy is expecting is a sister of the girl that arrives. And as we finally move into the meat of the film, the shots are a little bit broken up by these inserts. So, for example, his foot moving in, her taking out papers from the bag, and a question that was in my mind while editing was whether these inserts were breaking up the story at all or whether they were adding to the story. Obviously, with the foot moving in, we were suggesting that he was expecting to stay there a little bit. With the girl taking out the papers, I wanted to show that she was ready for this meeting. But perhaps we didn't need these shots at all. Maybe we could have had it entirely in face-on shots or with a two-shot. That's something for the audience to let me know if this was distracting or if it helped.
Harry.
We came back to the issue of color grading, and if you see from the wide, it looks a bit more green than the rest. Again, this was made an issue by the fact that we had different color lighting inside and outside, which made it quite difficult to make it look the same between different shots. I guess moving forward, we really need to get a cinematographer to help out with these issues. One more thing I wanted to talk about the wide is that hopefully this was not too distracting because it was quite a close-in shot, but you can clearly see that there's nobody else in the cafe. We wanted to simulate the idea that there is other people in the cafe, as you'll be able to tell from the following bits in the film, where our main character refers specifically to other people in the cafe, but we didn't have a budget to hire anybody. So what I decided to do was really punch in with the wide, so it was really just sort of isolating them and allowing room for the audience to imagine as if there was somebody else in the cafe. And I'm not sure if this worked or whether it's clear that there's nobody else there, but this is what we had to work with. It would be great if anybody would let me know if this was distracting from the main film.
See boy.
No.
So you can already start to notice that in comparison to the first film we did, this film is a bit more prop heavy, let's say. More props have their own role to play in a specific part of the film. Especially working with a non-actress, it was important for her to remember the role that every prop played and when to use it. So she has a book and USB, a recorder, and pieces of paper. So this is where rehearsal really came into play. We were able to allow the main actress to practice with different props. I didn't realize how different acting can become when props are in use. But going forward, I would certainly suggest if you have a lot of blocking or if you have a lot of props for people to use, allocate that time and rehearse with the props in mind. It will really transform the production and the performance. This section where the boy extends his hand, I added a sound effect of the hand being extended, which kind of adds a little bit of a comedy. But I think maybe looking back, it was not the right choice because the rest of the film doesn't have these sort of elements. So it just sort of feels a little bit out of place. I added it wanting to put more padding in the film, make it more alive, make it more full. But looking back, I don't think it was the right choice to include it here. Talking about music specifically for this film, there's 4 different soundtracks and they sort of correspond to different parts in the film and they should make the audience feel different about each different part. I got these tracks from Epidemic Sound, which was really helpful for allowing me to play around with different styles. In comparison to the first film, which really didn't have much of a soundtrack, this has a lot more of a rich soundtrack. And it was a great first attempt, but I think going forward, what we really would need to do is to make sure that the tracks from one another sound like they're connected. At the moment, the tracks sound quite different from one another, so they don't sound like they belong to the same film.
What's that for?
As you will start seeing from this shot and the subsequent shots in the film, unfortunately or fortunately, the weather outside on the day of the shooting was very unpredictable. It was cloudy sometimes, it was sunny other times. So the sun reflection on the characters really changes throughout the shots. I sort of did my best in the editing room to try to match them, but you will still see a lot of change in between the shots of where the sun is. For example, for this shot, you see the sun in the center of the face, but it will travel around as the shots progress. And that was simply something that we had to live with the choice of a wide open window being right there in the center. We knew that this might be a problem if the sun was unpredictable, and unfortunately it was unpredictable on the day of shooting. I think going forward, what we would have to do is to make sure that on the day of the shooting, it was either fully sunny or fully overcast. In this way, we'd be able to manage the shoot a little bit easier.
Stop. Please stop, okay?
You'll probably be able to tell a big difference from the first film to this film in the dialogue quality. What I really tried to do in this film was to listen in actively to the recording as it was being recorded. And further to this, have a break in between a few shots being shot to re-listen to make sure that everything's working. Each character was mic'd up and I was actively monitoring whether the audio was good. So you will see that there's a clear difference in comparison from this film to the first film. I think these things can certainly be improved in the future, but this was a big step in the right direction.
Fine. I said other things too.
For this shoot specifically, it was very interesting working with one professional actor, the boy, and the girl who's not a professional actress. And it was very interesting to see what the boy was able to bring out of the girl in terms of performance. I've never seen her act like this, and it was very refreshing to see the sort of choices that she was making in the film. A lot of the sort of gesturing and the delivery was not directed by me, but rather something that she found herself or with this actor. That being said, a bit of a problem I found was getting her to deliver certain lines or certain actions in a specific way that I wanted. Clearly she had an idea of how she wanted to do it and she was going to do it this way. And I guess that's the problem of working with non-actors. In comparison, working with a guy, it was really easy to direct and it was very easy to change his performance if I thought it was not appropriate for the scene. And that's the difference of working with professional actors and non-professional actors. I think really moving forward, we would want to work with more professional actors. And I think this is the final shoot that we did that included non-professional actors.
You also said I'm no weather guy, but...
No, fine. I said other things too.
One more thing that you might notice from the shoot is the visual quality of the shots. Firstly, I really wanted to sort of get this idea of dreamlike quality, as if it's almost unreal that this is happening in a cafe. So what I did is I firstly wanted to reduce the noise that was naturally there from the camera to make it more unreal, but also to expand the brilliance of the light from the sun and other light sources. So you can see the light sort of diffuses on the clothing and on the face. And I did that by creating another layer of the same film and using a blend mode to make it more brilliant. I don't know if it works or if the audience liked this approach, but I thought this was something that was appropriate for this film.
Is this still part of the day or...
The slap in the film is actually a part that I'm really proud of and I'm really happy. It was probably the first moment in including both first and second film that stands out as my own style. This sort of slow awkwardness with a little bit of maybe violence. You can see by the way she rises, she's unsure whether she wants to slap him or not. And then the slap sort of is uncertain as well, which adds a bit more comedy, and his reaction further adds comedy to the whole thing. Going forward, I'm really interested in these sort of awkward characters and people that don't know how to act in social situations. I think shooting this in wide was a very good choice. And further to this, I think doing this shot over and over again until it felt almost awkward for the actors to do was a good choice for me as well. Because as you can see, it further elevated this action to absurdity. And I'm very grateful to the boy actor who was willing to get slapped repeatedly in this shot just to get this take.
You know what? I'm leaving.
Now, in comparison, this scene where she sort of grabs his arm and he's trying to wrestle his arm free from her feels a lot less realistic and a lot less natural. Clearly, if he wanted to take his arm out of her arm, he would be able to do it. He's clearly a lot stronger than her, so it makes no sense that he's not able to do that here. And I struggle to find a way to have her hold on to his arm while delivering this line and making it realistic. I guess this comes from more experience of blocking action and sort of these semi-violent scenes. But if anybody's got any ideas of how this could have been done more realistic, I'm really open to suggestions.
I don't even know what you want from me.
I want you to stop disrespecting women.
I've never been with a girl.
As you can see, the sun is getting more and more strong as the film progresses, which also adds additional reflection. I was just really lucky that the sun didn't get to a specific angle where it would be able to show me in the reflection, but we were approaching that moment and we really had to wrap the film before we were unable to shoot anymore. So these are things that you have to consider moving forward in production. You have to know how much time in shooting you have, and you really don't know these films until you get into a location like that and start shooting. I wouldn't even know that this was something that I had to pay attention to, like the angle of the sun and how it would make the reflection stand out.
Oh my God. Oh, I can't believe it. You were testing me, and you don't know nothing yourself.
I know that being nice always gets to go.
This fight scene was the sort of pivotal fight scene of the film, and we really tried to make it first aggressive and dramatic, but then sort of as it progresses to lead on to more absurd comedy, which essentially the film is about. So the way that we tried to do it at the beginning was have a lot of rapid cuts, and not only rapid cuts, but especially when there, let's say, is a hit, or in this instance, his head is being hit on the table. What I tried to do is to trim both the shot before and shot after so that the action is never repeated. In this way, it sort of adds pacing to the action. So we really tried to do this with the shots leading up, and as the fight scene progresses, how we tried to turn this dramatic fight scene into more of an absurd comedic scene was really by keeping the bit with where she's banging on him with the rucksack as long as possible. So it almost feels ridiculous, almost feels absurd. So that's the way we tried to construct the scene, to sort of raise that tension up and then sort of diffuse it with this comedic element. But of course, these things need to be planned in advance. You can see that the final shot is not as long as it could have been to seem super absurd. And unfortunately, this is because I didn't plan on editing it like this when I was shooting it. So I had to make these cuts to cut from one angle to another while the beating is happening, because we didn't have a long enough take of any one angle. So I think if I was to do it again, I would certainly make sure that when we're filming, that I kept this beating going on for as long as possible to really hammer home the idea.
You know how it affects girls?
I need to delete this app.
Another very interesting issue that I faced for the first time in this film was that the boy actor was half black, so working with his skin tones in comparison to her skin tones, it was a very different approach, and it was interesting to try to match them when they're not supposed to look the same on camera, how the color grading was supposed to be done while keeping the background the same. So I tried to do this to the best of my ability. I hope it worked, and let me know if anybody's got any tips or tricks when doing this with a multiracial cast.
Promise to be more respectful to women. Okay?
Now, looking back, this shot where he picks up his backpack doesn't make sense in terms of visual language. There's no reason why we have to follow the bag up in this instance, especially when the drama and the climax has been built up so high. It really diffuses the tension, and it's just out of place. So going forward, I wouldn't have made this cut. It sort of feels, again, out of place. Finally, in the last sequence of the film, the girl takes out a notebook that has a lot of names of guys and starts taking off the first name to suggest that she's on a mission to wreak havoc all across the country with various disrespectful boys. And I did this to sort of suggest that there's maybe more, to see if people were interested in this sort of content or not, and to potentially produce more films like this, and perhaps extend on her character and extend the storyline and sort of almost create a universe with this sort of idea. And that's sort of how we wrap the second film, called The First Date. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the background of this film. So the first difference between the first film that we did and this film was that the casting process was a bit more professional. As I mentioned before, instead of having both friends helping out, the boy actor was a professional actor that we found on backstage.com, and we put out a full casting list to find this role, and we had actually quite a lot of submissions, maybe 100 submissions for this role, so it was quite an interesting process picking the best actor for this role. And because I knew that I wanted this girl for this role, the most important thing for me when picking this role was to find a person that I thought would go well to contrast her character. And because this girl is naturally quite aggressive and quite outgoing, I wanted to find somebody more introverted, more insecure in a sense. So I think the boy actor Jason was really good in this role, and he was a really good pick. More so, he was really willing to adapt to any direction, and he was really good to work with. So going forward, I would certainly work with him again. In terms of the location, comparing to the first film, it was a much easier process because we didn't need to film in a charity shop. This film was set in a cafe, and as you can imagine, there's plenty of cafes everywhere. So the real constraint that held us down was the budget. Having made the mistake of the budget being consumed entirely by the location last time, I made sure that didn't happen this time. So I set a strict limit of 1/3 of the price that we paid last time to pay for this location. And at first that made things a bit more difficult, but once I've spread out the search, I was able to find some places that really worked for us. And particularly what I really liked about this place was the color of the chairs and the color of the setting. I thought it really added a nice atmosphere to have really bright colors and vivid colors to the film. More so, as I've already spoken, the window added a great texture to the film. It added natural light, and even though it was unpredictable at points and it was difficult to control, it still added a lot of texture to the final film. So I was very happy that we went with this option, and the owners of the location were very happy to accommodate and really happy to let us film for longer if we needed. So certainly I would film there again if given the chance. And more than this, they were happy to serve us free drinks, free coffee as we were working there. Now, the next aspect that sort of stayed pretty much the same from first production to the second production was that I pretty much did everything myself. I set up the lights, I set up the sound, and I was operating the camera and directing. So a one-man crew again. I think when you're starting out in this industry, you can't really expect much more of a crew than just yourself and your passion. And I was really happy to work with actors that were really receptive of this. Going forward, we've started to expand the production crew because I find really that every added person adds an additional layer to the film. However, I'm really happy that this was the start of our production process and we worked like this from the very beginning, because going forward we really chose carefully who to add to the crew list. We didn't just add a roster as you see in any big production. Every person we added really served a purpose, and we only had there if they were absolutely necessary. Again, it was a little bit difficult, and you can see, especially from the lighting that we'll go on to in a second, that it wasn't the ideal choice, but this is the constraints that we had, and we had to work with this. Now, talking about the lighting a little bit, I've mentioned it before, but as you can see, there were similar issues from the first film, but also new issues with the direct sunlight and the outside light. So firstly, the outside light and the direct light. Some of the issues that I didn't account for was that the light kept changing throughout the day. And certainly going forward, we would need to have a clear idea of what the forecast looked like going into this production. I guess this is why on the call sheet, people have forecasts. That being said, this is not something that could have changed due to the limited production budget. Maybe we could have moved a little bit in, but just knowing it wouldn't have allowed us to cancel the shooting day because everything was paid for already. And working with such small budgets, you just sort of have to make do. So it's really just a learning curve, and maybe the best choice was not to put them directly there on the front, or maybe it was a better choice to film earlier when the sun was a bit more cloudy. But again, these are things that you learn as you progress. The other issue was the artificial lighting that you sort of seen from some of the shots. We used the same lights that we used from the first film, and We already spoke about the color differences and the problems that created with color grading and how it didn't really look the same from shot to shot. Again, I think color is possibly the weakest link of all of our productions at the moment, and going forward we would need to entrust this process into somebody with more capable hands, maybe a cinematographer or a DOP. Now, talking about sound, which was a huge issue in the first film, I think even though the equipment was used the same, lavalier mics and Rode mics, I think the process was much better this time. The fact that I was listening actively as we were recording and I was reviewing every so often with a break in the shooting really helped maintain a level quality of the dialogue and the audio of the production. So I think this was a strong step in the right direction. Going forward, I would possibly entrust this job to somebody else who's not me, as I was recording and it was difficult to listen to the audio and watch the visuals and direct. So that's the one thing, but I think just talking about purely about the quality, it was certainly a step up from the first film. Now, talking a little bit about the script, the process of choosing the script, writing the script. So first of all, as I mentioned in the first production, that script was the first script we wrote for the screen, and that's what we produced. For this script, we actually wrote 3 different scripts, and we had a number of people who weighed in pros and cons of producing each one. And First Date was actually chosen as one of the films to be produced. We actually produced 2 of the 3 eventually. One never got made because it was voted as not important or not interesting. But First Date was certainly seen as something that was worth producing and worth watching for people. So that really improved from our perspective. Talking about themes as we've explored in this film, it's about a younger girl confronting a guy who's being creepy on the internet to protect girls. It's quite a simple context, but I think what really made it quite watchable and quite interesting was that it had that sort of dramatic factor that could have been easily used for a short film like this to make something punchy and easy to produce, but also quite watchable. It also allowed me as a director to sort of choreograph a fight scene naturally. In this way, I was able to both practice choreographing a fight scene, but also directing a fight scene and editing it later. Something that I wouldn't have had if a film, let's say, was a bit more dramatic or slow or sad or something completely different. And talking about this fight scene specifically, we already talked about it as we were watching the film, but something we didn't discuss was the blocking and the choreography of the fight scene. As the girl was not a trained actress, she felt a little intimidated having to beat up this guy on camera for this film, but thankfully the actor had a bit of training of stage combat, so he was really instrumental in helping her out to feel more comfortable. And a lot of the hits and everything are faked, but they feel more real because of the way we've angled the shot or the way we have the actors react to the hits. And finally, just talking about blocking a little bit, it was quite a simple objective in the scene as we have one person standing up and one person sitting down. So really, it was an easy choice for myself to have a character stand up and start beating on them. But I was trying to figure out what was the best way to make sure that the other character doesn't stand up, to sort of create this sort of dynamic of one being taller or dominant over the other. And I think the way that we've approached in this film was to hit the guy first and sort of stun him in a sense and give the girl some time to stand up and him not enough time to stand up. And from my perspective, it really worked, something that I'm quite proud of. So just to tie it all together, this was our second film, First Date, and I think it went really well. We really took a step forward from our first film. We've experimented with fight choreographies, with staging fights, with delivering different fights. Also, we've experimented and continued working with professional actors. This was our first professional actor that we worked with, and I think it really elevated the production. I think we further enhanced how we record sound, and that was done much more professionally, and the audio is much cleaner and easier to listen to. I also think that the script itself is much tighter And while some of the dialogue still needs to be worked out and it's a little bit clunky, I think the overall progression and the climax feels a bit more natural than the first film. While the first film felt a little bit perhaps deeper, in comparison this one is a bit simpler, but just from storytelling basics, I think this hits the marks a bit more cleanly. So going forward, the next step would be to combine the two to have more artistic merit in the film, but also to be able to hit those beats a bit more cleanly so that the film is a bit more watchable from the audience perspective. In the end, I'm really quite proud of everybody who was involved in this film, both of the actors and everybody who helped behind the scenes. And I think we produced something quite nice, quite rewatchable. Let me know what you thought of this film, and I'll see you again in the next behind the scenes.
Cut. That was great.